one more minute. Hello, everybody. Jake, Josh, Steven. All right. It's almost time. I'm watching that clock. Whatever. We can get started. Hope everybody had an awesome weekend. Hope everybody's got a little time to relax, didn't have to do too much work or whatever. I think it was the last time we were on that people were starting to yell out different topics, and to kind of take a break from just some of the drawing stuff and sort of the conceptual stuff, which I think bouncing around is always really good. Someone wanted to just talk about like rendering materials, and I think a few people seconded that, and if not, I'm just making that up to be convenient towards something that I wanted to do, because I think rendering materials can be really fun, can be really frustrating, but there are some definite ways to kind of make it easier on yourself. So rather than just hey, sleeping dumplings, rather than just kind of starting from scratch and making you guys wait hours for me to kind of like dredge up a drawing, I worked up this robot today, got the flatting done so that we can kind of get into the shading and start to talk about the actual material painting a lot sooner. It's still going to take me a little time to kind of get the shading pass done so we can talk about like concepts during that stage and things like that. So I pre-drew this robot. Doesn't really have a name quite yet, but I'm sure in due time. But it's got some leather, it's got some metal, it's some lights, a little bit of fabric on the little doll sticking out, the elephant doll sticking out. So there's a few different materials. I think if I'm counting them, it's 6 materials. You got leather, rubber, painted metal. There's some regular, just raw metal. That's 4. There's the lights. And what else am I looking at here? Did I say rubber already? So 5 or 6 materials. I'll have a better understanding of them. Some of them are pretty similar, but we're gonna kind of take a first stab into it. I think, hey Bob, I think materials is something we could just talk about endlessly. But one thing, as kind of like a beginner's guide to materials, is understanding light logic, because light logic is key to how materials respond. I think you'll see a lot of video games now are starting to have like these really believable materials. That's the physical based rendering style of doing materials, and that is really broken down how materials work in real life situations. And so what that's kind of created is this sort of like general knowledge base. And if you don't know what PBR is, initially when you look into it, it's going to feel really overwhelming. There's a lot of terminology. It's one of those things that people geek out on, and you can get really overwhelmed really quickly. But really what it is it's just physical based rendering, and it is the most accurate real-time rendering of materials and surfaces for, like I said, for real-time situations, primarily video games, but PBR is also used in film and television and whatever you're seeing that has more realistic materials. So it's really because it's really popular in video games. It was something that I spent a lot of time with as well. So I wanted to start with just sort of like a, and I apologize because I know that just like rendering a sphere is pretty remedial. But rendering a sphere is one thing. Understanding why certain things on a sphere are happening is a kind of another thing. So just to kind of get the ball rolling, no pun intended, I'm just gonna do a quick rendering on this sphere. Now I haven't rendered a sphere in a really long time. I hope it's just like rendering a robot, but we'll see. So I'm just gonna start with kind of a dark to represent the shadows on this sphere. And I'll throw a mask on it, and I'm just going to chew away at the mask. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with just what's called the shadow mask. And I think for the sake of keeping it consistent with the robot, I'm going to light it from the top right. So as if, like where this sort of like this area where my cursor is kind of dancing around is where the highlights kind of coming in. So I'll try and blow through this so that we don't feel like we're sitting in the basic for too long, but I hope some of this stuff starts to make sense. So there's always a little bit of light on a sphere. A little bit of light falls off even on the top edge of a sphere. And then as we move towards the shadow mask where it kind of gets larger, I'm going to increase the size of that brush and create that mask down there. It's not too bad. All right. Give it a little bit of sensitivity in here in that inner ring. All right, and then so this is just the shadow mask dropping down. I'm going to hit it as a multiply, and the reason I'm going to keep it as a multiply is because then we can add a color to this ball. That's dynamic, whatever color we want it to be, and we can add that whenever we want to kind of see like how the overall effect is working. So let's say we'll do kind of like a sort of a pale pink or something like that, or maybe a pale blue. I don't know. It doesn't really matter, does it? So I'm gonna turn that off for now because like you guys have seen me do in the past, I like to kind of like break it down into just the part that I'm working on. So this stage makes sense to a lot of people, right? Like it's just the light is hitting this sort of like top right area of the sphere, and as it kind of moves away into the shadow mask, it just gets darker. So that makes sense. But what's happening though is there are, let me see if I'm actually going to be kind of fancy. I'm going to set up lines with arrows. You guys done this? I love it. Arrows at the end, and I'll do, yeah. Okay, so the light is hitting as too small. That's better, but not big enough. There we go. Okay, so the light's coming in at this direction here. Now, as that light goes across the edge here, right? So the light, we're going to say the light's parallel, so it's like a sunlight. As it's kind of going across this edge here, this little edge here, that's where the terminator occurs. And what the terminator is basically representing is the darkest, or this, I'll say it's the second darkest of the shadow, because it's where the light kind of, it enters into the shadow mask and it creates this shadow mask that we're seeing here. Now, when I put the core shadow in, I'm gonna just paint it in so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Come on, work with me here. Oh, I see what I did. Let's see. I do this slightly different just so it's easy to undo everything when I want to show you the examples. There we go. All right, so when I add this core shadow in, I'm going to increase my opacity. I think it's having trouble with me right now. Photoshop's giving me a bit of a trouble right now. Give me a second. Okay, so I'll just talk about it while Photoshop kind of stops geeking out. I might have to restart Photoshop, but who knows. So this core shadow, where it gets dark and then it's brighter down away from where I did that core shadow, as the light rays skim past that surface and are no longer, they're not hitting it as directly as they are in this sort of like main highlighted area. It's the reason it starts to get darker is the less and less light rays are directly hitting the surface of the sphere. They're starting to glance off a little bit. So they're sort of like reflecting off. And then the very final kind of like, you can imagine it like the equator that's perpendicular to the light angle is going to be the core shadow, because most of the light rays are skipping past that area, so it's technically not receiving much shadow. But then what happens, and hopefully Photoshop has come back, and if it hasn't, come on, buddy, come on. I'm going to have to restart Photoshop. I don't really know why. It's usually working pretty good. All right, give me 1 second. Task manager. Sorry guys, just give me 1 second. Hopefully I can get Photoshop back up and running. If not, we'll do is jump over to clip. Yeah. Photoshop is just completely borked because clip won't open up. It wants to work so bad, but it won't. Okay, you guys are just being patient at this point, but I apologize. I can't even find it in my stack here. There it is. So that all that spherage would probably went away, so I'll just do it again real quick. Alright, we're almost back. Give me 1 second. Alright, so here's the sphere again. And then let me get my robot while I'm here. You. Alright. We are back in business. I'm sorry about all that. Everybody loves technical glitches. Okay, so what were we doing? Okay, so let's get this back up and running real quick. So we're gonna knock in a shadow. So use kind of a dark gray, set that to multiply. And mask that. Sometimes the big brushes give Photoshop problems, which I hope that's not what's going on, because that sucks. Okay, so let's pick a good brush. This, so much for getting all ready beforehand. All right, so shadow mask, right? You guys with me still? Did I lose everybody? Let's see if I can do this good a job a little quicker. All right. Sorry. So we got the shadow mask. Now, what was happening with the light rays is arrows at the end, and do 20 wide. Oh, I wonder what. That might be part of the problem. Okay, so when we have our lines, so the light is hitting here, and it's hitting really directly right here. So the light is getting, it's maximized there. That's why you always see it the brightest at kind of that area of the sphere. But as it moves here, it's starting to deflect off that way. Here, it's deflecting off even more. And all of the rays, like you can say, imagine like the 100% of the rays, less and less rays are hitting the surface directly, and they're sort of having this glance off effect. Now, the core shadow is kind of like, it's like the darkest in that area. The darkest the shadow is going to be, minus like the pitch shadow where it's getting close to the ground. So what's happening there is it's hitting right around, like I said, that perpendicular kind of equator line of the sphere. And what is actually happening there is the color of the sphere is at its darkest, that light is creating at that point, and the light rays have skipped past and are not really hitting that area anymore. And then when they hit the ground around it, the surfaces around it, they bounce back, and they keep hitting and adding light to this area, and that's why it's lighter. But as those light rays bounce back, any light ray that glints off it again is also going to miss it. So even though light is hitting this way and bouncing back, every time it goes across this perpendicular kind of equator line of this particular form, it's the least affected at that line, right? So you're getting the least amount of actual light in that area, minus where it's actually meeting the ground, where we get a lot of occluded light. If anybody has any questions, or if I'm not explaining that perfectly clear. But the reason that's important is because not all materials have that. That tends to be on materials that have some level of reflectivity to them. So if a material like those, like you can imagine like those new NASA paints that are like really like super blacks, when the light bounces back, and that's of course assuming that light it still has a highlight, so maybe that's not the best example, but when the light bounces back and it hits that shadow area, if it's a dark, like a rubber or something like that, it's going to absorb more and more light, and so the core shadow isn't going to be as apparent. And I'll show you what happens when we drop the drop shadow in on this example. So I'm going to start with just like a really strong shadow. Okay, now we know it kind of looks like it's placed correctly, but it's not correct, obviously. So it's getting light as well. So the light rays, I'm going back to these thingies. The light rays are I don't know the hotkey for the line tool. Okay, so as the light rays glint past this edge, they're going to hit these sort of shadow areas. I guess I made the shadow obviously as if we're not using parallel light, because just by the shape of it, you can see that because it's expanding, there's a point, an origin point of where the light is. So technically, if I were to use parallel light like I described, the shadow would be a little bit smaller. It would be parallel. So one way you can determine your shadow is you can kind of guess these lines, and if it's a parallel line, then the shadow is going to kind of follow that positioning. And just for keeping it on canvas, I'm going to scoot it over a little bit. It'll still look okay. So, okay. So now we're going to add in where the occluded light is happening. That's down here. So, in the very kind of bottom area of this sphere where it's touching the ground, all of a sudden light can't get in there anymore. And so you've got these light rays that are bouncing, and they come back and they hit this surface, they hit this surface, they hit this surface, but as the surface gets tighter and tighter, less and less rays can get in there. They have to do, rays are bouncing off and they're going off into the environment and doing all kinds of things. But in this kind of pit shadow, this where it's meeting, less and less rays until it gets to a point where it's mostly occluded and it's going to be the darkest area. That does happen on most surfaces, and the only surfaces that isn't really apparent on is very, very reflective materials where light rays are hitting it and there is just a ton of light being bounced, and so that becomes less apparent. But on most surfaces, skin, most fabrics to some degree, wood, metals, things like that, there is at least a lot of this logic going on. And then the same thing goes for the shadow. So it gets, black would be nice. It has this sort of deep pit of where the light can no longer get on it as well. I'm getting a little bit messy here, but you understand the point. And the reason I wanted to kind of get this part done is because now we can talk about when we're doing this shadow, and when we're doing our shadows, and you're going to see a little bit in as I render out the robot a little bit. The light, if the light rays are close to the form, then they are going to be then this line is going to be sharp, and this comes down to how intense the light is. So this side is much closer than this side, so this side is going to have more light rays kind of casting out and creating a bit more dithering than this one, where the same number of rays is going to create less kind of like fanning out. And so you'll see that. And that's how you indicate distance. When you're painting in shadows, you can indicate distance through, I don't know if the blur tool is going to be strong enough to do this, but let's see. Otherwise, I'll just hand paint it. Yeah, it's not strong enough. It looks better, just a little bit blurry already. But, so let's do this. So this side, we're going to exaggerate a little bit. We're also going to make sure our brush is fully opaque. It's going to be kind of blurry, right? Because it's closer, but it's not right next to where that light is hitting the sphere. If you were to cut a hole in a piece of paper, drag it up to right where the light is hitting it, it's going to have a really sharp line. But as those light rays are allowed to kind of start spraying back out, they're going to get softer. And then as we get to this longer edge, then that blurriness is going to get even more kind of spread out. And when we're doing surfaces, when we're doing anything, it's really important to be able to set the distance that two objects are from each other. You know, when we're looking at just a sphere on the ground, it doesn't seem like it's as applicable. But when we have a robot arm in front of like its rib cage or something like that, the difference between this blurriness over here on this kind of left-hand side and the tightness of the blurriness over here, it really starts to indicate how far something is from its neighbor, right? And I can even do some of this stuff where I'm starting to add more of like an ambient vibe where more light is getting in there. And so you can see already, like you can tell that the sphere is definitely leaning towards the right and that the light is kind of having to travel a longer distance, and because it's going in a longer distance, the kind of variation in the light angles and any deflection it has from the surface of that material, of that actual object, is starting to cause more dithering off to the left and less onto the right. So that's basically how lighting works. Now, with this core shadow business, like I said, this is one of the things that different materials have less and less of, right? So, and I will even go so far as to say that things like gold are going to end up much more in just the reflection area, and they're going to have very, very little shadow data, or and this goes for chrome, mirrors obviously, but mirror finish things. If you have car paints that are very reflective, they tend to not have as many shadows on them, or very intense shadows. If the gold starts to get a little bit weathered, then it's going to start to be able to, it's going to have what's called a rougher surface. The different pieces of dust particle and all the things are now starting to absorb light. They're starting to catch the light and bend it in ways that are a little bit less perfect than a nice shiny piece of gold. And so it's going to start to have a shadow cast on it. Okay. I'm going to have this in the background. If there's something that comes up, we can bring this back and we can try it out on the sphere level. We may get into it when we get into the reflections, because surfacing for me is a lot about like how the highlights and the reflections and all the light mass areas work. But I wanted to kind of indicate some of what you'll see. And some of this I skip past when I'm doing my illustrations, but it's always good to have that in the back of your mind when you're working, so that you understand what you're at least trying to achieve, and if it's important to kind of get the object to read better. All right, Mr. Robot. So, as always, I have my line work on one layer. I've kind of set up my flats all on individual layers. So, real quick and dirty, I have my base kind of color, which is like this dark gray. I kept the wires on their own layer. If the wires are rendering, each individual wire was like ultra important, like it was really specific to the illustration, I would even create maybe even a group or just have individual layers if they're all the individual wires, but I don't think that that's necessary. I did the bright metals, I did the paint, and then I have these sort of like these sort of secondary and tertiary paints. And the reason I like to keep those on separate layers, besides what we've talked about in the past, which is that it's really easy to change things, is that they also may have slightly different reflections, and they might have slightly different surface materials. I have this rust layer, which is really just this like modulated browns and grays and yellows, and I might work on that a little bit more because I see some weird stuff going on up here that I didn't notice I did. But right now I just have it masked off, so it's completely black on the mask. You don't see it. Then I got the elephant, and I have the button and its stitches on separate layers. And I don't really think that that's necessary, but apparently that's what I was thinking at the time. Got the bag, which is kind of like this regular leather. I got the straps. I already started doing some of the weathering. We're going to do some of that on the bag. And then I got some of the incidental small stuff, so like the button and the little metals, and then I got the lights. I think that's it. Yep, that's it for my flats. And I could definitely do more, but that's it for now. Glass is one of the other materials that I hope we can get to tonight. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to finish up doing kind of like I'm gonna use PBR terms. This is so like lights will be called emissive. They're emitting lights, if you want to think of it that way. Sometimes people call the flats layer the diffuse layer, and there's a few different names that goes by. As now, I think albedo is a pretty common term for it right now. But the fact is, it's really just the local color. It's the color the object actually is absent of any light data. So you always want to work in this process. You always want to work on the sort of flats, albedo, local color, independent of the shadows. So yes. So I'm gonna go back. So one of the first things I got to do is finish sort of like weathering things up. You can see there's already some weathering going on here in the sort of like secondary panels, but you know me, I wanna rust them up. So I'm gonna go back to my rust layer. I'm gonna reveal it, and I'm just gonna do a little bit more modulation. And this is really not a very specific thing, other than just grabbing different subtle oranges and browns and just kind of like speckling them together. And this is just, you kind of have to imagine what the metal looked like underneath. Sometimes there's more red, and a good way to do this is drop your transparency down, and then you can sample. It's probably a little too much red for me, but see, now I've just added, I'm just sort of stamping in with this kind of like noisy brush, and get these, some of these bright reds are kind of nice. Alright, so that should do us. So now I'm going to turn the mask back on, and I'm going to just kind of start chipping them. And I think you've probably seen this in model making videos and all kinds of things. And actually, if you ever use Substance Designer, this is a lot of like what a lot of the automatic masks do, where they're picking up edges, adding different textures and noises to it. So I'll start. My way of doing this is I start with sort of like the more deliberate scratches, and so I want to sort of design in the chipping that I think is kind of like matched in the same style that I've sort of drawn the whole thing in. So I do like to do a little bit of hand painting before I start using noise brushes to kind of make it look a little bit more believable. But there are some forms, like anytime you see an edge, this is a kneecap right here, that's definitely gonna have a lot of chipped paint on it. These lower edges have gotten scratched up. It's a really great opportunity. And because I'm working in the mask, I can just keep my finger on the keyboard on X, and it cycles between the black and the white. And so I can sort of add in kind of a big chunk and chip it back out. Sometimes you get some really nice shapes that way. And I'm primarily going to be concentrating on the paint areas, even though that there's probably going to be some rust in sort of the gray metals and things like that. I think right now I want to make it look as if the chipping is happening off the paint, and the metal that's underneath the paint has been starting to get rusty, like you'd see on like construction equipment. When you first start this, it always looks too simple, looks not quite believable. There's just a little bit, it's a little too simple. I just said that, but it's a little too plain. But it's important to kind of go through, get comfortable with where some of the rust is going to be occurring, so you're familiar with it. So when you go back and you start stamping in noise, it's not just these like large swaths of random brush marks and things like that. Like there is some specificity to where things get chipped, and that's what makes it feel believable. So if there's a crevice, a lot of grime has gotten caught up in there, and those and even crevices where the metals meet, the the edges of those two pieces of metal catch on things and they kind of start to lose paint. And even just the fact that paint has a hard time sticking. If you ever noticed on like any kind of mechanical equipment, the harder edges is where the paint actually gets the thinnest when it dries, and so it chips the easiest there. The liquid of the, it just sort of, it has a really hard time staying even on those areas, so naturally the paint is going to chip more where edges turn. And then definitely where there's damages and stuff like that, I think we can really make it look, gets chipped away. And we'll do a little bit, so the thing that this mask kind of doubles as is, if we chip away the paint, if it makes sense, we can actually use it to load a selection, to put little highlights where the paint, like like let's say the light is hitting in the top left again, it might, right on this edge here where I'm painting the rust in, there might be just like a little glint of a highlight that catches it, and it adds some really cool dimension to it. So these masks, even though you may never ever use them, if you're in the habit of making them, they're there as like options for you. And the one really nice thing about weathering is if you've been sloppy about flatting, about doing your diffuse layer, the rust kind of like saves you. I think Adam Savage on his Tested shows says it hides the crimes. It's a pretty accurate way of looking at it. So even the stuff that I'm painting by hand, as I come in with some noise brushes after this, are going to start to get calmed down a little bit and unified. But this is like, this actually ends up kind of like the storytelling. Like, you've done all this drawing and you're starting to think about like who the character is and where it's been, and these rust marks are little bits of story. Like when you see CG characters of robots and they're rusty, it has a very different vibe than when they're clean. Where they're rusty is actually just as important as that they are rusty just to begin with. That, if they've been mostly buried and the whole lower half of them is rusted away, or if they've been, like rained on a lot, there's often like streaks. I'm not going to get into the real specificity of those kinds of streaks unless we have plenty of time. But you can tell a story of like even like how it's been aging and where it's been aging through how this rust stuff works. So like he's got these kind of like curled up fingers right here, but that's going to cause, like if he's been beaten on enemies or whatever, he's definitely going to have more chipping going on there. So I want to spend a little time just making sure that his knuckles are properly beat up. Yes, Wally and Eve. Yeah, that was, man, they walked into such a perfect, the dichotomy that they created on just the surfacing alone, it told so much story. Okay, so just to my original point, I'm gonna keep moving on, and I always have the option of like going back and like hand rusting more if things aren't working with some of the noise brushes. But getting some of these, so like actually I only did it really here, and I should have done more. I did it on the elbow a little bit, but I do like to add like really specific giant chunk rust pieces, because a lot of the noise brushes do have hard time telling that kind of story. So getting these transitions of like where something substantial has happened is always really nice. Okay. So let's break out some noise brushes. And I'm just going to go ahead and nip it in the bud right now. Like, people are going to ask me, like, where my noise brushes are. Like, I don't know where I got these, and I don't ever feel comfortable. I've made a few brushes. I don't even remember which ones those are. I don't know where I got half my brushes. I download brushes as much as the next guy. So I don't hand them out. So if people are asking me for brushes, I just don't feel comfortable with that because I didn't generate them. I'm not the author of them. All right, so I'm gonna start with this. This is like basically like dust, right? It's like some variation dust in it, and what it's doing is it's pitting the metal a little bit, and what that is like, to me, what that is like areas that have started to thin out, and they're starting to show rust through their thinness of that paint. That helps kind of bring that through. And already it starts to ground the character a little bit. And then some scratch brushes go a long way. This is like my old favorite, but it was just, probably overuse this. But it goes a long way. And just, you can try different scales, and some of them are too obvious, and if they don't follow the form properly, it can be really jarring because it just doesn't. So you have to be careful. Like, sometimes you have to go back and kind of edit these out. And there's a couple techniques to kind of keep your rust. Like, once you start editing this stuff, it can be frustrating that you've landed something good and then you stamp something in, you regret it. You can break it up into multiple layers, and the way to do that would be to have multiple duplicates of the rust in a group that have different masks on them. And so as you start to get more tentative and a little bit more weary about trying things out, you can duplicate that rust layer, clear the layer completely so that it's black, and then just work on just some of the new stuff. And if you don't like it, all it's doing is just adding to it. Because I can even demonstrate that. Like, I'll duplicate this layer. I'm going to put the link back on, and then I'll put the layer as black. And so we're right back where we started. So the rust. So now I can say, like, oh, okay, I wanna try something dramatic. I'm gonna like really chunk him up right here. I'm like, oh crud, I really messed that up. Well, some of this more subtle stuff that I painted on the previous layer, I would have to like paint that back out, and I'd be really bummed about it. So just having it on a separate layer allows me to remove that, try different things out. I can be a bit experimental with some of this stuff. And I don't have to feel too precious, or I can stay precious, I guess is maybe the more accurate way to say that. I don't have to worry about doing things to some of the painting that I felt like was successful. So it's sort of like an autosave kind of situation where if something's working for you and you really aren't willing to lose it, go ahead and just duplicate the layer. At the end, if you want, you can always merge all your masks together so that you have one cohesive, one large mask. But if your files can handle it, So I'm just gonna keep stamping in some of this rust. I won't take it too far, but I do want them to be pretty beat up. And nice thing about doing rust in any weathering is make sure that you're cutting back in, meaning like switching. I'm using the masks, and so I use the white to reveal the paint, but then I kind of switch to black and kind of calm it down. You kind of build and subtract and build and subtract. So you're not always just adding. Sometimes you're putting something in to sort of subtract back out, and that can go a long way. What else we got? Just random. Here, so this is just like a kind of a noisy, airbrushy thing that I like. Drop the opacity a little bit. He's starting to look nice and rusty, I think. So on these higher edges, we're going to do a couple of things on the painted edges. So if he's rusted, I would imagine that his paint's starting to get a little bit old. So one way to kind of accomplish that kind of like faded look and you see this on like statues and old equipment, things like that, is that like the higher surfaces, the sun that have been sort of facing the light more often, they get more bleached out, and then the areas that are kind of like away from the sun or hidden in shadow, they tend to retain a lot of the chroma of the original paint. So I'm going to go back under the rust above the paint here, and I'm just going to, there's a couple different ways you could do this. You could take the entire paint layer of these kind of greens that I've got going on, and you could just do like a duplicate version of them and hue set them into something that's a little bit more brightened. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just add a screen layer of maybe like a solid color, something warm like that, and screen it, and just drop the opacity until it's just a little brighter. There we go. Okay, so now I'll just use, I can use kind of a noisy brush, or I can use a smooth brush. It doesn't really matter. This isn't so specific that people are going to really notice it too much. It's just going to add a little love to your painting. I'm just going to kind of stipple in the high spots here. I'm just going to kind of brighten it up, you know, and just some of these higher areas where light has been a little unkind to the paint, on the tops of the shoulders. And then we can do the reverse to kind of accentuate this look. We can put a multiply layer. So we'll do a little bit of grime, a little bit of sooting. So we'll do solid color, something desaturated, not too dark, and we'll set that to multiply. You can see it's just darkening everything. So I'm just going to reveal a little bit of that, and I'm going to work in areas that would have been not facing the sun so much, kind of capturing grime and the dirt, but also some of the paint is just a little richer there. And there's different ways you can accomplish this as well, but it's more about the concept of the fact that the paint at the lower areas is going to have just a little bit more body to it, a little denser quality to it. Hey Jason, no, I did the drawing ahead of time because I just wanted to be rendering tonight and kind of showing off some of the stuff that I normally do, but just spend a little bit more time with it instead of letting everyone fall asleep on me. All right, so you can start to see like it's already starting to tell a story in the paint just from where we were at. So if I shut off those layers, I don't know why I turned the damage off. So this is where we started, and then we added the rust just by kind of like, this is on top of everything, and then we added the sort of lightening and the darkening, and all of a sudden it's starting to have, it's already starting to have volume, and that's because the artifacts of being bleached out by the sun are kind of they are light logic to some degree. They do have like a shadow quality to them where they're not allowing light in, but that isn't the light data. The light data is going to be pretty much the next stage. I want to do a little bit of work on the leather pack, and I think we'll probably just add a little bit of grime to the elephant, and then I think we can start to move on to getting this guy shaded up. All right, so we'll go to the bag, put a layer above it, and I'm going to link it down over it. So now I can add a solid color over it, and I can tweak that to be what I imagine the raw leather is. So it's probably warm, pretty desaturated, something like that. And then I'll just invert that mask and just use like a little noisy brush. This little brush is perfect for it. Just anything that has a little chunk to it will go pretty well, because you just, same idea as the rust. You're just going to kind of go across the edges, and you think of like bomber jackets and old leather bags. Well, this is an old leather bag, but leather bomber jackets are awesome reference for this. And I'm just going to go through and I'm going to kind of start chipping up these higher edges where the leather has started to crack just from being used so much. And I'll stipple every once in a while, like, it's starting to crack in different areas. And then straps, they tend to have like striations in them that show that they've been folded a lot, and so that's broken the surface. And just that little bit that I just did, and then I'll just use we'll just use the same scratches and stuff like that. We'll just add a little bit more in there. And these scratch brushes, I always want to make sure that they're playing second fiddle to the hand painted stuff. I don't want the hand painted stuff to get I don't want to become too reliant on the sort of like procedural quality of using lots of noise brushes. And there's room for as much and as little as possible, but I really do feel like hand painting a lot of this stuff tells a bit more of an accurate story. It comes from the same voice. It sounds a little bit froofy, but I really do think that it looks better. Alright, so we've got that bag. Could probably add a little contrast just by making the bag just a smidge darker. And then that's working pretty good. And then where's the little stuffed elephant? Okay, and so for the elephant, really all I want to do is just give it a little bit of dirt. Like it's been, like whenever you see pictures of lost dolls and stuffed animals or whatever, and they're just kind of beat up, and this guy probably found it. So I'm just gonna throw a multiply layer on my flats. I have all these, I have the stitches, the buttons, and then the main flats, and I'm just gonna, it's too dark. I'm just gonna add a little bit of grime, and I'm just gonna stipple it in, and it just gives it a lot more character. And this is one of those moments where it's nice to let some of the values start to talk to each other, get really close. That's just more of like a color theory thing for me, but you still want some of the brighter pinks and more of the central area. So I'm not going to put too much dirt over the face itself, but like on these extremities, I'm using some of this brown that's in him. And I could definitely add the same kind of grime to the overall paint. That I did to the overall paint to like the yellow lights, but because I know I'm gonna blow them out so much, I'm just gonna skip that because I know that it's basically gonna be unnoticeable. But if the lights were dim, I think adding some darks in there would be pretty cool as well. The last thing I wanted to do before I move on to the shading was add some sort of grease strips, and I always like to do this as a separate pass as well. So I'll pick kind of like a warm medium gray, multiply that. So this is going to act as like oil drips, and these are again like nice little storytelling moments. And I'll just find areas where oil has dripped from joints, and try and remember what the verticality is, where the form was. In this case, most of the forms are just already facing down in some way, but if I put a grease mark going this way and all the grease marks were moving this way, that would tell the story that this thing had been laying on its back for a long time. So all these rivets, getting a little bit of dirt in them. Sometimes I just kind of like scumble in like little bits of dirt in some of the tech areas just to kind of make it look like, I don't know if you've ever popped your engine, the hood to your engine and looked inside and it just looks like dirt is everywhere. But really what's happening is it's gathering in the crevices. So you kind of go through and find your crevices and just work little bits of dirt in there. And you don't have to go crazy with this stuff. It can get overwhelming and calm things down. I think I've also talked about that in the past. Like if you put a drip in and you really need to concentrate on it, but then calm it down. Just like have it slight, you know, don't have, just because you painted in hard doesn't mean you shouldn't go back and calm it down a little bit. So we're starting to get some of the sooting going on. And again, I really suggest, you know, working with the mask, not as the paint, because you can keep your finger on the X key, which just alternates between the black and the white in the swatches palette, and you can add and subtract really fast. Just makes the painting process so much more organic and faster. And just because I'm yapping so much, if you guys have a specific question or if I do something that just doesn't make any sense, which is often the case, hit me, answer the question. Let's see if we can get some of the cross contour look of these, like the drips happened kind of like around the form. And then, I don't know, I think that's looking pretty good. And then I'll do a little bit of sooting on the bag itself. So I'm just duplicating that layer. I'm gonna fill that mask up with black, start over, and then just sort of like where the leather is kind of meeting other surfaces and kind of captured some grime. Start stippling in a little bit of dirt. Just add a little story to it. Start to sound like Bob Ross again. Go. Happy little bag. Alright, I think I'm going to move on to shading this thing. Again, the nice thing about working this way is if you do forget to do something, or if there's a part of it that you think needs a little bit more attention, you can always go back. The shadows, the highlights, everything, they're all in separate layers, so it's not going to be that big of a deal. Alright, so I'm going to collapse that flats layer. I'm going to put a fill layer. I don't know why that got scooted, but put a fill layer that looks like I have it at about 70%. That sometimes changes for me what I want it to be, but that is that just allows me to see a little bit of the flats underneath, but not so much that it's affecting like how I'm going to actually do the shadows. And I will say in this drawing, I don't know why, but I started spotting some blacks in. If I was going to do like a true rendering, I wouldn't spot hardly any blacks in unless it was like I knew it was pitch black. So I screwed up. Alright, so I'm going to add that same mask that I made for my flats to my shading group. I don't need this anymore. I think that was some old baloney. And I'm going to name that my shading. And even for my personal work, I really do try and label as much stuff as possible. It doesn't sound like a reasonable thing to ask, but if I ever go back to a piece, just even for like a little thing, like it kills me if I don't label the thing. How much time it takes me to kind of like get up to speed as to what I was doing and how I got, you know, because it's not always like, layers aren't always in the exact same order. Okay, so I'm going to set the general lighting direction. How do I manage time for art? I forgot to set this to multiply. Hold on a second. I hope I didn't. Make sure I save here. Oh, if I lost this, I'm going to absolutely cry. Hang on a second. Having technical issues tonight. No, it's still churning away. What's going on? Oh my goodness, I'm frozen. Just give me a second, I want to make sure. Get this back. So I don't think I saved. You guys. I'm gonna absolutely cry if I lose this piece. That. I'm just gonna sit here for a second and talk, because I don't want to lose this piece, and I don't know why it's giving me so much trouble tonight. I've not had this much trouble with my machine in a long time. And if I do lose it, I'll make it up to you guys. I'll just start drawing, and we'll get back to this next week. All right, so let me answer some questions real quick while I'm hoping this thing comes back. My task manager says it's still churning away, but it does say not responding, so that's bad news. God. Alright, so username is saying, how do you manage time for art? Well, it is my primary job, so there's that. I do it 100% of the time. It is my main job. So at least 40 hours a week are spent doing the work. But the justification to doing more work outside of just like what you would consider like a normal day-to-day job is if you don't continue to train, then tasks at work start to become, as you move through your career, the expectations of what you can do or what you're able to do, the versatility of the things that you're able to do, those things, they start to build up. And if you're not training all the time, it's kind of like running, I guess, going to the gym. If you're not constantly keeping up and trying to push yourself, then when you go in to do your 40 hours, you're not going to be able to accomplish as much. You're going to really slow down, and your output is actually going to go down. So I find it really important to constantly be working to kind of trying to get better and better, because it's not like any of you guys are letting off the throttle, and you've probably been on Instagram enough to know that it's not, things aren't getting any easier. So that said, I'm, Jason, I just saw that pop up. It does go away really quick. So that's exactly the same thing as the gym though, right? Like if you've been running and all of a sudden you're not running anymore, it just, that stuff just goes away really, really fast. So you have to stay on top of it. And then there's the sort of neurosis of like when you have an idea, like, I don't know, I'm sure everybody in the stack right here can kind of join me in how this feels, but like you have to create something. Like you have an idea, and if you let it simmer too long and you don't get to it soon enough, it starts to like die on you. and the excitement that you had for it starts to die. And what I think the excitement does is, like, even though, like, I think the expectation when you imagine what that is you're going to get to the table at some point and you're going to execute that idea. And, you know, even if the idea is really strong in your head, well, there's a difference between the energy. If the energy is like, this is a great idea, I think you're going to have to, or you forget, you're going to start to need to explore to kind of push the idea, no matter, even if it's like the best, clearest idea in your head. The fact is, the energy you have when you come up with a new idea is going to push an idea further while that energy is still sitting with you. If you get back and you go to it later, then I think you're going to find that idea isn't going to be pushed as hard as it is. So, long story short, to answer your question, like, how do I manage my time? I manage it terribly, but art is really, really important to me. And beyond just like my career, I want to be able to explore and tell the stories that I want to tell. This is kind of like learning more and more notes on a guitar. Like, the more you know about your drawing process, the more stories you can tell, the easier you can tell those stories. It can be anything from the story of, like, how we were talking about, like, how grease drips out of metal, all the way up to, like, what the overall character is doing in their world. Give me 1 second to pause here. I just want to check on status here, see if I'm getting this file back or if I'm just going to end up curled in a ball later. It still says not responding, which is absolutely bonkers. But my CPU is still running it, so there's still some hope. I swear it's got to have something to do with some of the larger brushes, or maybe I was running the processor pretty hard today and should have restarted beforehand. Alright, we'll give it a little bit more time. We'll just keep yapping. Sorry, guys. All that said, if you really want to push yourself and kind of like do more for your art, you are going to have to put in time that can often be unfair to the rest of your world. And that's a really, really tricky thing to balance. I have not done a good job at it. Hey Casper, you joined us right as my machine froze, so enjoy looking at kind of like a static frame of a partially done rendering. Anyway, the point is, you have to balance it. I think you have to hit it. Like, if your family and your friends know that you executing an idea kind of clears your head and it's good for you to get that off the table, then I think as long as you're meeting the needs of like what the rest of your life is supposed to be, like paying your bills and spending time with your family and doing all the things that you're supposed to do, as long as that stuff is being taken care of, then I think you can create with a clear mind. But of course, and I am notoriously bad for this, there are always times where I mismanage that, and I definitely put drawing in front of more important things, and that has never not come back to bite me. But it's a rinse and repeat thing. Like, there's this sort of neurosis to a lot of this drawing stuff where sometimes you just do terrible things to your life in order to kind of keep creating. That's the honest thing. I wish there was something more PG than that, but there's just, there is a quality to it that it isn't always a healthy thing. Let's see. Bob's agreeing with me. I like Bob agreeing with me. Much easier to find arm panel 1 than layer 47. Yeah, that's right. Definitely naming your layers. Especially when you start duplicating a lot of layers, it gets pretty crazy. So yeah, Jason, yes, the every time I sit down, if I haven't drawn for a day, even just one day, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. It's absolutely, it's bonkers that something like that can be taken from you that easily. And I wish I knew how to rectify that. The only real thing that works is that you just kind of keep pushing every single day, and that just sucks. There is a part of that that's just like, I wish I could just draw whenever I wanted to draw. Well, you can, but if the quality of your drawing matters to you, then it's something that you're going to have to maintain on a regular basis. Yeah. Well, and Jason's saying that it feels like he's starting over because he's been off drawing for like a year. That may be true. It's different for everybody, but I think the truth, if there's some truth to this, that it comes back quicker. There is a memory. It's like anything. Like, if you don't drive a manual transmission all the time, but you get in a car, you're gonna probably grind the gears a little bit at the beginning, but it's gonna come back to you a lot quicker. I think the typical one is riding a bike, right? But you just don't ride it as well initially. They never say that, do they? So I'm just going to try one other thing to get this back, and otherwise I'm just going to go draw in clip, and I'm going to tell Adobe to go screw off, and that means next week we're going to do surfacing. So this is the second time Photoshop has done this, and the last time I had to shut it off and it didn't do a save file or a recovery file. Bummer. Okay. What should I draw? How about that? While you guys are waiting for me to futz around for a second, I'm going to jump in a clip. I'm going to do some black and white line drawing just for like an hour or something like that. Kind of have some fun. Maybe we'll color it. We'll see. But we can keep talking about some of this life-work balance stuff while I'm drawing. If you guys don't say what I should draw, it's going to be a monster, I guarantee it. Yeah, and have fun. That is the trick. And I have 2 high school kids now, which I don't even like saying out loud. But anyhow, I have 2 high school kids right now. And so I'm pretty in tune right now with the fact that fun is the first thing anybody wants to have. And the thing that I constantly find myself returning back to is most things are fun if you're good at them, if you're confident, if you're capable at something. I think you could probably, roof a building or, mop some giant train station. And if you were like really good at it and you had you had a technique that was like really crazy, these are really weird examples, but like if you were just like really good at it, there would be some fun to doing that. And if you're constantly struggling and it's constantly work on top of the fact that they already call it work, then I think you're gonna find that it's not gonna always be very fulfilling. All right, so let's see. This is definitely not coming back to me for now, so we're gonna jump in a clip and I'm gonna draw. And I'm just gonna leave this on in the background. If it comes back, we'll jump to it, but otherwise we're just gonna draw. I apologize. I'll do some deep sea creatures. We can do a deep sea creature set. See if clip borks on me. How about every 10 minutes you guys remind me to save if I haven't saved already. Start off just by saving the file. Alright, sorry about the rendering. I promise I will do an entire stream of just rendering. What I was hoping to do with the rendering is like kind of stick to sort of more mechanical stuff for one of the live streams, and then on another live stream get into some more like organic stuff. and then do like one more follow-up, because that kind of encompasses a lot of them, but the difference between organic and mechanical is pretty substantial. And then there's sort of advanced materials like the golds and chromes and glass and things like that. We're going to do a little glass, but I think if we could maybe talk about it for like 3 different sessions, then we could cover off on a lot of like just like general ideas for materials. So I'll have to jump back into the mechanical materials for another stream if we don't get that Adobe file back. And then we'll do organics, and then we'll do the advanced stuff. And that is not the end by any means, but that will kind of get everyone started. All right, deep sea creatures. Nice thing about deep sea creatures is they're not standing on anything, so you don't have to worry about the weight. All right, so let's start with a big plump thing. So I love deep sea creatures, they're awesome. And then maybe it's got tentacles going on. Try and indicate some sort of like bioluminescence, but I want to figure out the overall form of this thing first. So let's do this the way I would normally do it. I'm going to block in the silhouette. Bob, I will save when this thing actually looks like something worth saving, but yeah, you're probably right. I hope it hasn't been 10 minutes already. Alright, so let's do like pufferfish spikes on its back, but only like on the top. Although I do really like how pufferfish have them kind of like all over their bodies. So as they kind of get closer to the sort of Terminator line, they're real short. And then just to have some fun, I think, do some of the ones on the back. Then it needs its little fins. We're gonna make this thing look kind of silly. Okay, good. Going back to work-life balance. Do you ever get burned out? Yeah. Yep, I do. I'm not going to get into it too much, but the personal side of it, but I quit what is arguably one of the best jobs in the world. I was burnt. I left Insomniac Games after 17 years. I was burnt out for a number of years, and a substantial amount of risk and sadness and frustration, but ultimately you have to take care of yourself. You have to decide what you need, and sometimes that means a reboot. And but I think burnout is probably the most common thing with artists, is they just get completely burnt out, and it gets fed by the fact that a lot of times things aren't going well, and that frustration of things not going well can lead to you just getting frustrated more and more. So I think it kind of goes hand in hand what I was talking about with practicing. If you can make things fun because they're easier, and that means staying on top of it, I think that there's an argument to be had to say that it's you're not going to get burnt out as quickly, because you're going to have you're going to be up to speed. Your tools are going to be, and by tools I mean your tricks to your style, and the things you use to kind of get going are going to be intact, and so you're going to have the ability to kind of make more things with less frustration, and I think that kind of saves you from getting burnt out as often. It doesn't mean that's the only factor, but I think that definitely plays a role. Alright, I'm gonna get kind of goofy here. I'm gonna go like, you knew I was gonna add teeth, but I'm just gonna go really big, like tusky teeth here. But yeah, burnout is awful, and I'm even more lucky. I have my gorgeous wife is also an incredible painter. She's a traditional painter, paints figurative work, and she will often get burned out, and she goes through all the same things that we all go through, even though she's in a different world of art. She gets burned out, and a lot of times she gets burned out when I'm feeling good, so then there's guilt. Or I get burned out, like when I decided I was gonna finally give up on everything that was great in my career, and she was looking at me like, what are you doing? But having her support made everything possible. So yeah, so one thing, I'm getting older. My kids are very reliant on me to make sure that everything's taken care of. They don't ask for more than any kid should ask for. They're amazing, but I'm still tasked, as well as my wife, with making sure that they're taken care of. And I am not comfortable working anymore if I don't think that they are taken care of and they have what you need. So it's a big deal to me. I really can't concentrate. Even tonight when on Monday nights when we sit down to get together and do these live streams, normally the nights kind of taper down a little bit more organically, but on these nights I hustle to make sure that they're fed and they're they're showered and where they need to be, and that their alarms are set and homework's done, and because I just can't even concentrate on what I want to be doing if I think any of that stuff is lingering. And I've learned over the years, even all through my tenure at Insomniac Games, that you got to take the time to make sure that your house is in order, that you've got all your stuff done before you sit down to really create. Because if there's anything nagging you in the back of your mind, the work that you create is subpar. It's not your best work. And I just think that is such a huge part of the creative process. So if part of burnout, I think very literally, is the fact that you've got too much going on, too much on your mind that you just haven't taken care of. And even though you really want to get to your drawing or your project or whatever it is, you're just not really going to do any justice to it if you're not taking care of the things that are, need your attention. It's all getting pretty heavy. Save. All right. It's a good enough drawing. We're all safe. Thanks. All caps. All right. I used to do life drawing to help with it. Now I try to do master studies. That's awesome. That's really cool. I haven't done any master studies in a long time, but I think life drawing has been like, I was starting to do it towards more and more towards like when I was realizing I was burnt out. I draw my dogs a lot. I go to life drawing a lot. My wife, who's the painter, she hosts life drawing at her studio, and so I was able to have kind of like a date night where I would go and hang out with her, but also go and life draw and she is really picky about her models, and she has awesome models and good variation, really great crew. So it just, the whole thing was like really comfortable, and I just had such a good experience with it that, you know, I started making better art even just on the side, because you come home from life drawing and you remember like how to draw some hand that you just like have never been able to draw before, like, you know, like some pose that you saw, like, and it works its way into your work. It feels like you're cheating, but like for some reason you can draw a knee way better than you'd ever be able to draw a knee before, and it just comes so much easier. And I just, some of that burnout that I was feeling started to dissipate just because of some of those moments in life drawing. And I can't say enough how much life drawing influences really good drawing habits. Philippe's saying, what are your favorite drawing exercises for warm-ups? Skulls. I like to draw monsters. You know, whatever. Let's see. If I know I'm going to be doing a lot of tech work during that day, you know, if the project that I'm attached to is a lot of technical stuff, then I will try and do some technical warm-ups. You know, try and, you know, get my hand moving in good ellipses. I like to do an actual drawing. I don't know if you guys have been following some of the warm-ups that I've been doing on Instagram, but those are actual warm-ups. You know, I like to focus on a character. I try to keep it to an hour. That way I don't feel... I feel like I've given myself a certain amount of time to warm up, like a reasonable amount of time, but I haven't destroyed my day, because I still have 8 to 14 hours of work to do. So, you know, give myself that hour, but, you know, that means if I'm warmed up, then I'm going to make the work that I'm going to make during that day is going to come out better. If I don't warm up, then I'm going in cold, and I just really have a hard time getting anything right, especially the tech days. You know, organic characters are always tricky, but there's a bit of forgiveness to them. But when you have to do if you're doing a robot all day long or something like that, or perfect rendering, oh my gosh, if you're not warmed up, it's just absolutely painful. All right, so this thing needs something absurd. Not that he's not absurd already, but I just can't enjoy him if he's not absurd. So I'm gonna give him this big kind of bubble thing here. Just nice and wrinkly. Oh yeah, that works. And then we'll put like a little brain up here. Do all kinds of nasty little things. There's this fish that I saw on some special where like the top of its head was clear so that it could look up for predators, but it had to like look through its brain cavity. So it was like yeah, I think some pretty crazy stuff going on. And then I think just because this would be funny, I'm just going to float it in some water so it doesn't, it looks like there's some air. This thing. Alright. Saving. Oh, those parasite. Yeah, they, what was it? They just discovered all this time the anglerfish, the one that is in Finding Nemo. Those anglerfish have had this parasite fish, this little tiny parasite fish, stuck on the side of them, and they just always, I mean, they were so different. Turns out it's the male. The male is like this tiny little fish, doesn't have an antenna, it's completely parasitic. Oh, it's this is like a recent discovery. I think that is so funny. My wife thought it was even funnier. But yeah, the male is like this ugly little thing, and they attach for life, which is like, you know, they you know, they know because that they make assumptions that the fish are so hard to find each other that once they find each other, they do need to attach themselves for life. Otherwise, they're not going to be very successful. I don't know. That's so funny to me. All right, let's see. Let's start inking this guy. Yeah, we're all watching the same Netflix documentaries, I think. It's terrifying. But the deep sea stuff is like, I actually, watching deep sea stuff and some of the nature stuff, but like it really has to be like bizarre. If I'm like supposed to be drawing, if I'm supposed to be drawing and there's like work to be done, and I go and I watch like some Netflix special on deep sea life or something, in my mind, I'm still working. Like I'm still doing I'm doing something that's like a positive for my career or whatever, like if it's like I'm training, it's like I might as well, it's like I'm saying I've gone to the gym, but really all I did was like sit on like one of those like sit down machines and just like put it on the lightest setting, but technically I'm still working. It's got like one of those like sea cow vibes to it. Yeah, we've had some conversations in the past about like how you get inspired and what you do when you got block. I think most of my ideas actually come from listening to song lyrics. Just because someone will say something really clever and I'll just get a picture in my head, and a lot of times it's not the right picture, which I find it always really funny. But like, I'll hear something and it'll just trigger some bizarre imagery, and I have something, and then that's just gold. But documentaries are absolute gold as well, especially when they're full of like new recent discoveries, because then you feel like you're getting fed things that nobody has explored really before. They're yours to kind of like go for. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm joking that I don't take it seriously, but when you have a deadline or something like that, it's certainly not what you're supposed to be doing. But I think there's an argument to exactly what you're saying, which is if you're burnt out and you just if you can find some joy in a documentary that makes you love shapes and forms and surfaces, and you get all kind of like re-inspired, you go back and that starts influencing your work again, and I think that can be just as helpful. Jason saying, my memory is trash, but I saw a piece of a few years ago of a robot standing in a pond with the front open and a little dude sitting fishing out of it. Was that yours? Yep. That was, so the head of that robot, I did that for Inktober. The head of that robot, it was like a warbot, and I was imagining like what they did when they, like, I love fishing. I don't get to do enough of it. But that kind of relaxation, and I was imagining like what a warbot would do, and having a big warbot just fishing just seemed a little bit on the nose. I'm gonna take my sweatshirt off. But then I thought like maybe like there's like a little guy inside of him that just needs a little break, and so he kind of like unfolded and got out of it but the head was the same. They shared the head. So I thought that was maybe a slightly unique take on that kind of vibe. It was a lot of fun to paint. I think I did that with ballpoint. I was doing a lot of ballpoint pieces at the time. If you guys haven't tried doing ballpoint on vellum or on some nice paper, it's absolutely relaxing. Thanks, man. Yeah, I love doing those pieces, those little stories. I gotta get back to some traditional pieces. They do a lot for the soul, I think. Something about the tangibility of having something to hold at the end of it really does something for me. I like the balance between working digital and working traditional and not doing only one. I used to get into this argument with my sculpture teacher in college, who I absolutely adored. And he was so disappointed that I had moved to 3D modeling and that I wasn't sculpting traditionally anymore. And I said, I do sculpt traditionally occasionally, but I don't do it as much as I used to, but I do model all day long. And I was working on the Ratchet and Clank stuff and modeling a lot, and he was trying to say, well, that just isn't it. That's not the same thing. And he was just being a purist about it. And eventually it came to the point where I said, I'm doing 40, 50 sculptures a year. And you're doing what? 3, 4 sculptures a year? And when I get back to sculpting with clay and I hit the clay for the first time, I've been practicing. It's like the difference between running on a treadmill and running in the real world. Running on a treadmill is not as good as running in the real world. But if you've been running on a treadmill for the last 3 years, you're definitely going to run a lot faster than if you just decided to only run when you could out in the real world. I don't think there's a replacement, but I definitely think working digitally allows you to try out and make a lot of mistakes. Things that maybe you get a little precious. This is, you're starting to see my own psychology here. Get a little precious. But the digital allows you to have that freedom to just try things, explore, and then when you go back and you're working traditionally, you have all these new little tricks and shapes that you're comfortable with, and then you get all the benefits of that beautiful, tangible material. Yeah, I agree. It is an emotional thing. There's something, I think, maybe it's just the fact that that's some of the stuff that we were given as some of our initial media when we were younger, that it feels like it's a part of us, it's a part of the original process. Maybe it's the fact that we're, as animals, we're just supposed to be touching real things and not only just visually seeing them and not ever, I don't know. There's probably so many layers to it. The fact is, it works, but there is something really great about doing both that I've really noticed, and I revel in it. I love the idea that I now have two sides of that coin. One fosters exploration, and one fosters that kind of emotional need that you guys are referencing. I don't think there's a single thing in the art world, you guys have heard me talk that I model and I sculpt traditionally, and texturing, I love working in Substance Painter, love working in ZBrush, love drawing, love doing everything by hand, and I don't care what program I'm in. When I get sad for people who get caught up loving on a piece of software, or just falling into a camp. And it's not about that. It's about creating. Who cares what the software is? If someone gave you Microsoft Paint and said draw something, and it was that or nothing, do it. It's fine. Just make something. Probably going to come out like garbage, but the act of making something is so satisfying regardless of how good the software is. I just don't like to get caught up in that stuff. People just make things. People making things in the software that is available to them. There's something I just find so alluring about that, rather than just, you hear all the jokes about people who get caught up between ZBrush and Blender and all this other stuff, and they just it's such a waste of time. It's no fun to listen to. I'm gonna check on my Photoshop file. Still not responding. Man, I was actually starting to be pretty happy with some of that paint. A lot of spikes in this drawing. I don't know how that happened, but maybe we'll go a little bit more tusk-like with these things. Yeah, a little bit of a walrus vibe, but just to kind of keep it creepy. Do some like secondary and tertiary chompers. Tips for increasing speed while drawing. I feel a lot slower than what I could be. Think about that for a second, because that's something that I strive for as well, is that little bit of speed. I don't know if you guys consider what I'm doing fast or slow, so I don't want to answer. In some ways, I don't even know if I'm qualified to answer. I can say that, like, I'm drawing within my comfort zone right now. Like I've been working within these kind of shapes, and I have my own little like shape logic and line quality that I'm always trying to hit. I know it when I see it, and I know how to make it, so I'm faster at that than if someone last week or the week before asked me to draw just like a human character, and they wanted a female, and I can do it. And live was kind of funny because I had to do it in front of everybody, and I had to kind of keep up. It's much slower for me, I don't do it that often. Once I'm warmed up and I'm drawing humans, then it comes just as fast as anything else. But there is this sort of like speed comes from being comfortable with what you're working on. If you've ever tried to draw a comic, those first 2 or 3 pages are just laborious, especially when you're trying to get the hero character on model over and over. But if you pay attention to anybody who's done comics for a while, once they have drawn that character for a little while, they start to get on autopilot a little bit. They understand the shapes and the forms of that character so well that it's just much, much faster. So there is something to be said for just becoming comfortable with what you like to draw. And the painful part of drawing, I think, is that there's so many things that you need to learn how to draw. There was a joke I read last week about how, you sit down and you just want to draw, and the next thing you know, you're Googling how a bird looks, like, even though you've seen a bird a million times. Sleeping Dumpling saying, I sometimes find drawing contours, blind contours, helps speed practice. You're less focused on the precise details. I can see that. Blind contours are awesome. They're super fun. And actually, my I don't know who got us the game. If it was my wife that tracked it down. There's this game where you have to like stick a marker board on your forehead. It's got a little strap that goes around your head, and then you get a card and you have to draw whatever's on the card, and you can't see it, but you're blind drawing the entire time. And of course, like I said, my wife is an artist and I'm an artist, and the pressure is on. But it is, I mean, it is so nice that when it's embarrassing when you do a terrible drawing, but it's so satisfying to know that sometimes you draw something and there's this familiarity to the shapes, and you see it come out in these kind of blind drawings. And I don't know, I just get kind of like, I get a sense of relief that that memory is working, like that I'm starting to see and hold on to shapes, and my hand is really connected to that shape. So speed is definitely comes from just the familiarity with forms. I don't know if that, I definitely want to stay positive with it, but like I don't want everything to sound like, oh, it's work, everything's work. Like the work is fun, like it's for you. It's like it's like when you were in high school. You think that you're gonna get in trouble for getting bad grades, but like those grades, those are like for you. If your grades were good, you're gonna get to do a lot more things, even though it seems like you're trying to get good grades for your parents. The grades actually only do anything for you. We had an art teacher who knew that we were all, trying to keep our scholarships, and would say like, all right, who needs an A this year, this semester or whatever? And you'd raise your hand and he'd just give you an A. And he's like, I don't care. It doesn't matter. It's, whether if you want to get something out of this class, you're going to get something out of this class, whether I give you an A or not. If you do everything that I tell you to do, that doesn't mean that you've gotten anything out of this class. So I thought that was a really important point, to understand that all this hard work, all the things that you have to do, it's not for anybody else but yourself. It's for fuel your hopes and your dreams with your art career. I think that's what keeps getting me back to the table, is that, anytime I make some advance, I get a little bit better at drawing something. It kind of like, it fuels me to think like, how many other things could I learn how to draw? So let's see. Jake's saying, I listened to an interview with Jim Lee, and he said his trick is he draws all the characters with the same ears. I love his streams. I was watching them religiously when I first went out on my own, and I needed someone to kind of hang out with. He's amazing, and I think he's a good person to look at for not only like really high quality work and the right attitude, but he is also is striking a life work balance where he's working at home, and he's definitely doing what we're doing here, was just kind of hanging out, but he's making it happen, and he's got all these things going on. He's still hitting the table and still doing amazing work. I don't know, I think he's just a really positive person to look at. Nick is saying, I was doing my Inktober drawing of Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees and found myself researching who is taller. That's awesome. Who is taller? I would guess Michael Myers. Actually, no, Jason's... I don't know who's taller. I don't know the answer to that. I just made an assumption, and I don't have no basis for it. I'm going to go with Mike Myers still, though, because I know Jamie Lee Curtis is already pretty tall. He was always chasing her around. Jessica, you're asking how tips on creating unique characters, designs that break new ground. My sort of go-to is to, so there's the sort of the mashup stuff that I think you've seen even in some of this, like where I've got walruses and manatees and pufferfish all kind of like merged together, and some of the like the brain thing is loosely inspired from like anglerfish of the deep sea stuff. They're all kind of like mashup stuff. So mashup definitely leads you into some unique places. But what I another thing to think about, and I know I've said a lot of this stuff before, but it's theory is theory. I've really started to pay attention to like the hierarchy of forms of different characters and real people, and I thought it was really funny that and maybe some of that life drawing that I was telling you I was starting to do more of, it was starting to show me some of this. But the if a person has let's say like the hierarchy of their face is that their chin is behind their lips, which are behind their nose, so they have like that reverse profile, or if they have a very square profile, or if their chin sweeps forward, or the back of their head is really kind of like nice and oblong and has that like a Nefertiti skull, or is flat, or is very blocky. We pay a lot of attention to that when we're learning how someone's forms look. But the more you realize like that kind of like reversed hierarchy, or the square hierarchy, or the sort of exaggerated cranium that flows all the way through the body of that I keep calling them characters, of that person. That is that's something that it goes. It's like how their pelvic bone is shaped, how their knees are shaped, the arc of the front of their calves, how much it sweeps. When you see someone who's really angular, they're not just angular on their face, they're angular all the way through their bodies. If you see someone who slouches and is really frumpy, that's not just their face. Their face hangs the same way their chest hangs, or their breast hangs, or their shoulders hang, the way that the weight on their legs hangs. It flows all the way through. So while you're doing these mashups, I think the extra little criteria, the little challenge that you have to give to yourself is like, how do I make sure that there's a balance, that character looks like, it doesn't just, like you think of like a minotaur and it was like a man's body with a bull's head, and I think that can be really compelling. But when you're drawing the minotaur, like carry that form of the kind of weight of that bull all the way through that body, not just any old body with any old bull head on it. If the bull head is narrow and sinewy and has like really elegant horns, I think you want to get that synonymous quality in the forms of the body as well. Or if it's really beastie and heavy and thick, and maybe the forms of the hands and the way the musculature is, it kind of matches those rhythms. And that way, when you're doing mashups and you're mashing up different ideas and you're trying to find opposing ideas that work together, there's still a quality that they feel like they're together and they're working. And with creature design in particular, I think it's important that they feel like they have that underlying sense of believability. And I think that's the big part of it, is the fact that you could imagine that they were all kind of created from the same form structures. That's definitely a subjective thing, but I find that works best. If I'm doing a character that's very plump, and I give it plump hands and I give it plump fingernails, it just feels like it works better. Sorry, when I do some of these bigger arcs, sometimes I have to kind of go quiet for a second. Before I do that. I don't know if Jessica, if that answered any of your question. there's other ways to get characters to feel really unique, and that is by finding opposition, which goes against what I'm saying. It sounds like it goes against what I'm saying, but I'm not talking about in form. I'm talking about in like the storytelling of that character. Like how do you make something feel more interesting? And I think that can be in the contrast of ideas in the form. So like for instance, like with this character where it's got this plumpness, it's got this roundness, and to have these giant teeth on the front of it, these like big aggressive teeth. Actually, a real walrus strikes me with this as well. Like when you see them fighting, it's the first time you realize they can really move. But if you just sort of see them visually and you look at them for the first time and you see those giant teeth, I think on some core level it's like the opposite of a spider. Like you don't feel afraid of a walrus. You look at them and they look dumb and slow, and you see these giant tusks and they look like they don't have any function to them. But then, of course, nature has other plans for how they move. But that contrast of like those big bulbous forms that walrus has versus, like when you actually, the sharpness and the aggressiveness of the teeth, that I think that adds a lot of uniqueness. I mean, the example I like to use is like if you want to do a watchmaker, like why not make it like an elephant or a rhinoceros, and really make it difficult for that character to do what it's an expert at doing. That way, it makes it, to me, it makes the character's abilities feel even more impressive when you find those little kinds of contrast elements in the forms. And creatures are like notorious for wanting to have a lot of functionality to them. So if you can work in some contrasting forms, then I think you're gonna, like I made this guy dumb, and that's purposely what led me to want to put the little floating brain up here, because I think when something looks dumb and then you kind of like put the big brain in there's a nice little bit of contrast there. So I am always kind of playing that game. It's like, how do I make something, one aspect of my design, feel more important, and what can I use to kind of amplify that? And I use contrast to do that. And the other thing that I do for creatures and robots is I explore similar forms and shapes, like tentacles here and wrinkles and plates and things like that. I have a lot of things that I've drawn a lot of times. Not everything is unique every single time I draw it, but I try it in different ways. So I'm even getting better at just like my individual little things, how wrinkles work. These little compression wrinkles, these are relatively new to my repository. I love adding those little elements in that makes it feel like there's more weight behind things. So I'm always looking for ways to add more, but then I have to kind of explore it, try it in different ways, and there's successes and failures there. Oh yeah, save. All right. Too bad we'll never see dinosaurs like that. Yeah, I know. Well, you know what? Maybe not in our lifetime, but I think the whole Jurassic Park thing is probably going to happen at some point. The whole moral compass of not bringing dinosaurs back to life will kind of go to the wayside when humans get a little used to the idea. So, maybe. I think they're going to try and bring a mammoth back. My son likes to tell me stories like that, because the argument is that mankind hunted them to death, and so that they should technically still exist. I think the woolly rhino and the woolly mammoth were both hunted to death, so they're trying to justify bringing them back. So maybe you'll see a woolly mammoth before long. Hippos are more dangerous. Yeah, I know. Whenever you hear that, but then I saw like a YouTube video just recently of like hippos eating apples, and they looked like dolphins eating, fish. They were so happy, and they didn't look very dangerous at all. But I'm gonna believe that they are dangerous. Casper, how do you deal with the frustration when a client picks the wrong design out of a pile of designs? I don't deal with it very well, Casper. I have so many little tricks where I make it a little bit bigger, a little bit more resolved, in the center of the page, the best color palette. I mean, you're doing so much to kind of lead them towards the light, and then they just always end up picking the worst one. Someone told me a story about building a portfolio. They said if you hate drawing cars, don't put a single car in your portfolio, because if you put that one little car, it can be just this tiny little car in your portfolio, the first job you get will be like drawing cars for 6 years. And that's laughable, but it's no, I swear it's true. Like even as someone who looked at a lot of portfolios, I did find myself looking and going, oh wait, they can draw cars, and thinking like, oh well, just they wouldn't have put it in if they didn't like drawing them. So the best answer I have for you is you have to do your very best to have every single design something that you want to work on. And I know that is a garbage answer, but that is the only thing that actually works. Those other ones work, like I guarantee you the color palette thing works all the time, and the size things and the detail things, but it doesn't always work. And a lot of times it doesn't work on the clients you really need it to work on. No dragons, absolutely. I'm out the door if there's a dragon involved. I actually had to do a dragon for a guy recently, and a year ago or something like that, but it was funny. I don't even think I did a very good job on it, but I tried. I just have so many gripes about dragons that I just couldn't pull it off. Casper, does that help at all? Is that more disappointing, the fact that there isn't an actual trick? Be fun to do. Deep sea monster kind of. I used to have that kind of poster that you see in like aquariums, where it was just like all the different kinds of whales, or blue whales, sperm whales, whatever, and it was just like the side charts with all the different animals. I used to put those up in my room when I was a kid. I loved them. It was like the one thing my mom would let me buy when I would go on the field trips or something. Be fun to do like a monster version of that. Turn off the line. It's always funny when you turn the rough drawing off and you see just your line work for the first time. All the all the things that look like like there's that particular look to things that were just traced. Like whenever you've done like tracing on tracing paper, and you realize you're just a really bad inker. You have to go through and just finesse your lines, make sure that there's nice body and weight to them. What's something you wish you did as a younger artist? That's a good one. I like that. I wish I took on more projects. I love every minute of what I did for Insomniac and doing all that stuff. But I wish I had spent more time exploring smaller projects, working with different groups. The one downside, there are downsides, but one downside that I'll talk about working in one place for too long, and one of the things that makes you stay at somewhere for a really long time is the fact that you need stability in your life if you have a family and you're starting to get older, and you have plans for the future, and that's a really positive thing to be able to to pull that stuff off. So when you're young, I find it is really like one of the things that I don't think I regret not doing it, but I wish I had done more small projects with more people, because one of the things that I value the most about working in the arts and having this career is all the people that I've worked with and all the talent that you can pull from. It's just all over the place, and when you stay one place for too long, even though people come and go, there is a limit to how much unique experience and unique talent you can kind of learn from, the eccentricities different people have. And so moving from lots of little projects and really feeling out what is a really good fit for you, and learning as much as you can from all these talented people that are out there, that's worth more than money to me. So I would say as many experiences as you can get yourself caught up in before immense amounts of money become such an important part of your life. At some point when you start a family, those things really do take priority, and I don't regret any of that, but I think you have to take advantage of your situation that you're given, and that is such an opportunity that if you have low overhead to be able to go and just learn from other artists and do different experiences and have bad experiences, because just like doing a bad drawing is sometimes so beneficial, because a bad experience is beneficial as well, because you know what you don't like. Knowing what you don't like is just as valuable in a lot of ways. I think the same thing goes for I wish someone had said that when I was dating, is you don't want to end up without knowing what you really like. And so if you want to use that analogy, art is the same way, really understanding what you genuinely like, the kinds of people you like to be around, how you learn, what you bring to the table, and feeling valued. That stuff is all huge. There's probably other things. If I think of other things that I wish I had done when I was younger, I'll let you know. But I will say, and this is a really old man thing to say, spending more time learning how to draw would have made my life a lot easier. I do it all the time now, and I'm definitely making up for a lot of lost time. But thinking you know how to draw things and just kind of taking it easy on yourself is a lot different than actually putting the time in. it took me a long time to learn that I'm never going to know how to draw as well as I want to draw. No matter what, the bar is always moved. And I think I assumed when I was young that at some point I would just know how to draw it really well and that would be enough. And it just took a really long time for me to realize that it's this ongoing, endless process. You never, ever stop learning how to draw. So I wish I had put a little bit more time in. I'd be further along now. But that's pretty old man-y. I think that's pretty standard advice. Let's see, Casper saying, just do all of them great so all is satisfactory. Yeah, right. I would rather turn in 3 designs that I want to work on than 16 designs that only a few of them are okay. Because the likelihood of them picking, actually that is something I consciously do. I don't give too many options. I really don't. It's kind of like the In-N-Out Burgers thing. There's no reason to have a huge menu of things to pick from. It just confuses people. You think you're doing them a favor, but it really isn't. You have to make some decisions for them. And that's not like you being mean. It's just like you're just narrowing it down. They hired you to help them. They didn't hire you to confuse them. Every client's different, but that is fairly true. There's one sea monster down. Scoot him up here. I'm gonna do another one. Do a page of sea monsters. Some clients will get decisions paralyzing with way too many options. Yeah, it's just like this drawing process, steps, baby steps, a little bit at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself, don't overwhelm the client. Just leads to all kinds of problems for you. So I already have an idea for this one. I don't remember what those are called. The fish that have like the teeth that stick off the front of their like long sword thing. I think that's where I'm gonna go with this thing. I play with the shape a lot. Look like hedge clippers. I was selling some tires from a car that I had, and a guy came and picked them up today, and I was doing it through that Facebook marketplace thing today, and the guy said, "Hey, I looked you up on Facebook." He was an older guy. I'll put him like 65 or something like that. And older guy, and he shows up and he goes, "I looked you up. Are you some sort of graphic designer?" Yeah, that's who I am. Some things are hard to explain. My mom thinks I'm an animator to this day. She thinks I work at Disney and I'm an animator. Gave up trying to correct that one. That one came together pretty quick. Do I always tackle box the designs? No, but I do love that process. That actually, Jessica, you were asking about techniques to find things really unique. You can see, like, even just using the previous shapes, which is called tackle boxing, and I think I think puzzle piecing is another term for it. There's a lot of people who use this, and it works amazing for just finding designs that you would normally not try, is to like fit them into forms. I wasn't doing it as on purpose as what you just said. I was thinking about those those aquarium posters and how they sort of did that with the trying to maximize the size of the whales on each one. So I think mentally I'm still there, even though you guys have all probably moved on. Let's do like serrations on the back of these teeth. But no, I don't always do it, but I love doing it. It's such a good exercise to find good designs, is to have those negative shapes that you're forced to work inside of. I don't think I've ever had a bad design come out of that, or at least maybe I'm not answering the actual question I'm trying to answer, but at least I tried something and I ended up with something really unique. So yeah, it's a really powerful tool. I just saved, by the way, so everybody can relax. Take a deep breath. We're all good. When people ask what I do, I tell them I work in games. They get very excited and ask if I work on anything they know. And then you have to let them down. Yeah, even with Ratchet and Clank, that was... I went and gave a couple of lectures at my kid's school. The parents would have to come in and talk about what they did, career days and stuff like that. And did you work on Halo? Did you work on Destiny? You guys... Little kids like in 6th grade asking me if I worked on GTA. No. Have you ever heard of Ratchet and Clank? No. What's that? I think my neighbor plays that. He's weird. Okay. Yeah. I don't get to sit at the cool kids table quite yet. Someday. Yes. Do I miss working in a studio environment with others talented artists? Yeah, absolutely. So it's amazing. It's such a if you're in a studio right now and you don't realize how lucky you are, you're being paid more than money by working with all those talented artists. It's incredible. Everybody offers something, and I miss it like crazy. But I will say, the other side of that is I also don't like being told what to do, and Insomniac was so amazing about that, because as long as you brought to the table your best work and your best ideas, they saw the value in that, and there was not a heavy-handed directorship to that company, and I reveled in that. A lot of studios don't function that way, but at some point, even that, you start to become a bit of a prima donna, and maybe that's where I was at. I just want to be able to do my own thing. This, you guys are going to be in the same boat as me in this one. There's probably so many ideas floating around in your brain, and the more time you work at a studio, the more time you have to kind of put that stuff on the back burner, and that's a personal choice. How long you're willing to wait to kind of move on to some of those personal projects. And sometimes you can move on to them in your spare time, and sometimes work just never lets you have enough mental space to actually put the time in. And I just, as part of like what we were talking about with the sort of like burnout, I think that was something that I really wanted to kind of get back to, is like actually working on projects that I had been wanting to work on for a very, very long time. So there's a lot of that going on, but it comes at the cost of not being around all that talent all the time, which I get to conventions and Lightbox and all that stuff, and it's just such a relief to just be around artists all the time. People who just love the same thing you love. That's why I love hanging out with you guys. This is awesome. This is like, this satisfies me on so many levels. I wish I could explain it to you guys. Just being able to talk out loud about stuff, babble, sometimes incoherently, just about art. It's fun. Yeah, I miss it terribly. But it's not always good. And it's different for every single person where that good and that not good lie. I did 17 years at one studio, so it couldn't have been that bad. And to this day, some of my best friends still work at that studio, so I consider them very close to family. Yeah. I get to cry about two things tonight. Thanks, Steven. Lose a file. I miss my boys. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding, man. I stay in touch with all of them. That's been really fantastic. Just being able to. There's this notion that you get when you're leaving these studios, whenever you leave a project or a studio or something like that, and it's like, it's like you feel like it's like a Disney movie ending, or it's the end of like an old Hulk television show, where like it's just over. But those people are still around. I talk to them almost every day. So, where I wish I could see them every day. That would be amazing. I still get in touch with them every day. Like I said, they're like family. I ask them dumb stuff all the time. You've worked at home for 15 years. Are you sane? I have to know, because that's what my plan is. Oh, okay. Difficulty, staying inspired. Hopefully some of this is helping. I'll hang out, challenge each other to do more. Something, just kind of go back to what we were saying, like about speed and life drawing, all this other stuff. I spent about a week just drawing our goldfish swimming around in our tank and learning like how the scales worked and some of the forms. And actually it was so funny how little I actually knew about what this stupid goldfish actually looked like. And it was huge for even just some of my monster drawings, because it was like all the little scales and the forms where their eyes bug out. I had those, like that fancy one with like the eyes that are like they are all on the side, kind of weird. And so yeah, that just, and then ever since then, just like just the muscle memory of knowing how like scales feel was huge, because it's so valuable. Good. I'm glad you're getting something out of this. I'm definitely getting stuff out of this as well. Great. That's awesome, guys. I'm absolutely thrilled. Almost done with this guy, and we'll move on to fish number 3 or 4. I think we could probably get maybe 2 down here. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Just fill this page up. Here's the point where I turn the rough off and make it and realize all the line weight is all screwed up. How do you hold your pen? I tried to have the eraser on the button, but it hurt my finger in the beginning. Are you pressing the button with your thumb or index finger? I press it with my thumb. Let's see. Get that on screen. So so I never want to sound like this, but I'm just gonna go for it. I can't use the big pen that comes with the tablet. They've got these giant kind of like jelly pens. They remind me of like all those like kid pens that you would have in like middle school. So I always get the slim pens. So it's like this, I don't remember exactly what it's called. I think it's called a classic style, and it's much more the size of a number 2 pencil. It's got this perfect little swell at the end, so I really like the way that rides. And then if you roll it so that it's right on the side of your thumb. Let's see. Here we go. So you see the way that just falls right into your thumb. Then that's where I keep it. If I keep it on my index finger, yep, that's not natural. I think my index finger and my middle finger are doing a lot of the heavy lifting as far as like the control goes, and then my thumb has just the right amount of extra dexterity where I can actually hit that that button. But just notice my nib turned. Alright, now we're good. I gotta replace the nib in my pen pretty soon. I don't normally change the nib very often, but recently I've been really blowing through these things. I've always learned something in the stream, and great hang. Perfect. That's awesome. That's makes me so happy to hear. Josh is saying, I really started drawing about a year ago. Being in my 30s makes me feel like I've missed a lot of time, but these streams are great. Cool. You know, I would have thought earlier on that the whole starting late thing was a much bigger deal had my wife not become an amazing teacher. And she has turned people from all ages into amazing painters. She teaches online painting and drawing and during the pandemic, but her in-person classes are pretty amazing. She does workshops. Anyway, point being, she has shown me that like it comes down to a lot to just drive, and sometimes being 30 means you have more drive than when you were young. And I think I just sort of explained that, like how I wish I had put a little bit more time into some of my drawing time. And but when you're 30 and you really want it, and whatever age you are, when you really want it, you just decide you actually want it, and you're not just some kid who's like, maybe I'll draw, then that motivation goes a long way into speeding up your process of actually learning something. So yeah, you are technically behind, but you're also not, because when that inspiration strikes and you want to learn how to draw, like that, it doesn't matter when that hits. So it needs like a little spoiler. All right. What do I have mapped to the pen? Okay, so when I'm in Clip Studio, I map, so the swatch over here, where the black swatch and the transparent swatch, I have it mapped to X, and I don't know, but I think that that's what it is by default. So if you're in Clip Studio and you hit X, it's going to swap between the foreground color and the transparency swatch. And by doing that, it basically turns your ink brush into an eraser when you swap to the transparent, and so you get a lot of consistency rather than switching to a different eraser and erasing your lines back out. So I map that swapping hotkey, whatever it is. You can make it whatever you want it to be, but then you go into the preferences and you map this button to Clip Studio to that hotkey. And so while I'm drawing, I can just swap between the foreground and background color, or foreground color and the transparency color. In Photoshop, I just have it swap between foreground and background color, which is black and white often, or whatever the colors are. And it's just used because I paint in the masks often, then that's not that big of a deal. It works about the same. So I highly recommend trying that out. I like it a lot. I've been doing it for years, and I'm really comfortable with it now. It's fun. It's fun to be able to just cut back in. So like I'm gonna go with a more opaque brush just for a second, even though I'm not gonna actually keep it. So if I'm drawing with the opaque foreground color, and I just hit with the side of my thumb the button on the side of my pen, and now it's using the transparent ink. I hit it again, it adds, subtracts, adds, subtracts, and so I'm able to not pick my pen up very far. I can just cycle between those two very quickly, and I really enjoy that. That's the way I like to work. Hopefully that helps. Okay, so that was for Bob. And then Nick says, 30s luxury, I'm 46, I've wasted a lot of time, but I'm enjoying the journey. Reader. Yeah, I really do feel like it doesn't matter. I mean, it matters, but it's not the end of the world, because doing good drawings comes from the passion to want to do it. Doing good drawings comes from really good observation, having good stories to tell. That stuff doesn't always come when you're younger. Sometimes it comes later. What am I going to do here? I think I'm going to do more of like a jellyfish thing this time. Let's see if I can pull this off. Yeah, I'm not sure I would have had the patience earlier in life. Yeah. It's just different for everyone. And like we were talking about before too, like sometimes being good at something is what makes you want to do it. You know, I think that's an unfortunate truth. But sometimes that's the truth, you know, it's like just being good at something. So if you haven't been training and you're not good at it, maybe you don't want to have as much desire. But I think as you get older, you realize if you just put the time in, all of a sudden when you start to get good at something, it starts to become fun. So I think the younger mentality is, if I'm not good at it, I'm just not going to do it. I think the older mentality is, I can get good at this. You know, it's like when you see someone doing some sort of trade and you realize they're a human being and I am also a human being. I can clearly do the same thing they're doing. Carpentry is a lot like that. I do a lot of carpentry. Yeah, Bob, what you're doing with I do that as well. It's you know, it's a preference thing. Don't I'm just I've got my hand like what I'm doing right now is I've got my pen doing the swap, and then I've got my other hand sitting waiting to scale the brush up and down. So I'm part of my drawing experience is I'm constantly scaling the brushes up and down with my left hand using the bracket keys. So that's what their job is, and then I can just concentrate on adding and subtracting my line with my with my pen. I have a little bit of a cheat on this fish stuff, which I enjoy it so much, but I grew up working on a fishing boat, and so I'm very, very familiar with a lot of the shapes, and I have a fascination with them to this day that goes beyond just art. Like I just, I grew up on the beach in New England, and played in tide pools my entire childhood. Surfed, worked on a fishing boat, just a typical New England little town. So when I draw fish, and I admittedly have a shape library built up for a lot of years. If someone tells me to draw a barnacle, I can do it, at the drop of a hat, versus people who, maybe grew up in the Midwest are going to have to do a lot of research on that. I remember I was working on a comic and I had to draw a lot of corn. I had no idea how corn looked. But fish shapes, they're my bag. I love them. So beautiful. Oh, Casper, yeah, I do that as well. And actually, if I'm being really honest, I don't keep my thumb on the button. I keep it. I'm gonna be so weird right now. I'm gonna hold it. I keep my thumb right next to the button. Wait here. Yeah. Sorry, this little camera is tiny. So I keep my thumb right next to the button, and then I roll the pen into my thumb. That's what I'm doing. And if you hadn't asked that, I never would have thought of that, but that's exactly what I as soon as you said it, I was like, what? Why is he doing it so often? But that's what I'm doing. So maybe just roll it slightly out of your thumb if you're going to be trying that technique. You guys know who I know everyone knows who he is, but Ian McHugh. God, I can't believe I just did that. Ian McHugh draws all the flying barges and things like that. Was talking to him at CTN, having a nice conversation, and he grew up in a village, a fishing village in England. It's a really remote area, and so he just all those beautiful flying ships that he does. They just come from such a familiarity to what that stuff actually looked like. It's not just like he's just doing research. And I think I've probably beaten it to a pulp, this topic, but it's like drawing what you know and what is important to you and where you come from. It's such a unique story, and And even he was admitting that, you know, like, the stuff wasn't as exciting to him as it was to other people because it was so fresh to them, but what he was drawing was familiar, and so that excitement of drawing the unfamiliar didn't exist as much as it did for people who had never seen the stuff that he was drawing before. So that's a huge part of this, is like really understanding that the unique experience that you had growing up, just like I had with fish and growing up on the ocean, is an advantage for me, and where I may not always find it unique and fascinating because I'm so familiar with it, it is to someone who has never been around it. So learning to kind of embrace that and tap into that is a pretty big deal to coming up with ideas and knowing that calling on your past is your friend. Yeah, sorry. The drawing is like Casper's turning it into a judo. It's funny. Probably is, huh? Thanks for sticking around, Alex. I'm gonna crash soon too. I think I'm gonna draw one last little fish or something like that, and do anybody who has questions or something like that. But thanks very much for coming out, and I really, really appreciate it. And sorry about the technical stuff. I promise I'll make it up to everyone, and I really want to get into rendering. I enjoy it. I've not had this problem with Photoshop in a long, long time, so who knows. What can't you see? Can you move the canvas? We can't see the face of Gobble. Oh. Is that better? I didn't realize that. I wasn't looking at that screen. Let's get some personality. Sorry. You guys are having to stare at my face. That's not fair. Alright, so we'll continue the little tackle box thing, and we'll just do one little fish down here. I don't know what that's going to be. We'll see. Do one little fish up here. So I just think that's cool. Like you know, these shapes are just sort of like, they start to tell you what they're gonna be. But they at least give you an idea. So do like a, so the boat that I worked on was a lobster boat. So we'll do a little lobster type thing here. Guess it's more of a shrimp. Not going to draw the claws. Okay, so that'll be our that guy. And then this one, do fish again. We'll do something with two, like an underbite. Yeah, that'll be funny. Yeah, line weight seems to be something that people bring up a lot, and I'm a nut for it. I find like if I was gonna if someone said you have to give up everything about what you like to draw, like your techniques, but you have to keep one thing, it would be just like pencil drawing, line weight, you know, just like that feeling of getting thick to thins and stuff like that. And you know, I really feel strongly about practicing by drawing natural forms. You know, it takes a lot of kind of control to, you know to like lean lightly into a line and then just bear into it to kind of get that heavy line. Understanding that the thickness of your line represents light just as much as it represents your form. So knowing that a thicker line is going to look more like a shadow form, you know, like in the bottom of the shell, as it turns away from the light, you know, we're going to add a lot more body to that, and that's going to give it a bit more substance and feel. And so a lot of what I'm actually doing is I'm looking for a little bit of how much something protrudes from the form, and also shadows. So, you know, like on these little call them warts, or, you know, like these little bumps on the shell here, a lot of the weight of the line actually ends up facing down, so that you get this sort of sense that there is a light source. And you can see, like on the back of the shell, I barely let the line, especially, you know, like where the shell is meeting the most light. And that just takes repetition, and just sometimes you just lay out that line nice and light, and then when you're, you know, there's a confidence to when to go heavy, and that doesn't always come. Sometimes you have to lay the entire thing down light, or sometimes you have to race it back out and then come back in. You know, I might not be confident in a shape, and so I'll stay light, and then I'll come back and lay in that more abrupt, heavy, thick line, as I'm trying to establish it. It is a very unreliable. It's so funny how some forms, it doesn't matter. You could be like the best at drawing robots, and then some days you wake up and you just can't hit a form, can't hit a circle, you can't hit a whatever you're normally good at drawing, and then other times you can. So you have to kind of stick with it. But yeah, line weight, life drawing is definitely the best for that, because you're trying to represent actual light, and models being fleshy and wrinkly and whatever else is really great about your model. You're trying to represent that with line, and it really teaches you a lot about what you are trying to describe with line. If you don't have access to a model, which a lot of us don't right now, I really recommend drawing some plants. I've said it before, I really recommend drawing a leaf, drawing something natural, drawing a skull. If you have skulls, I collect skulls. I hesitate to say that out loud. Draw them, and they teach you line weight. And the nice thing is you're not focused on creating, and again, this goes back to what I was saying about like breaking your process down into steps that you can complete. But like I really feel strongly that focusing life drawing stuff on learning line weight and not focusing it on your character design can be beneficial, because the thing that you're trying to draw is already established with life drawing. When you're busy trying to invent something for the first time, and you're trying to hit line weight, and you're trying to hit the silhouette, and you're trying to hit all these things simultaneously, you're just kind of setting yourself for a really tough math problem. And if you can break it down into smaller equations and things that have givens, then I think you're going to just have a much easier time. Man, I love lobsters. We're going to get lobster instead of turkey for Thanksgiving this year. I'm so excited. Beanpole, tell me, like what do you find as you're working? Like, what don't you like about your line work? Is there something like it? Line work has a lot of different permutations of not being likable. So, give me a bit of a specific. Maybe I can dig into it, or maybe I can't help you at all. Nobody likes hearing the life drawing thing, because it's not always pertinent when you're trying to pull a piece off and you're struggling with line weight, and someone says, go do something else. It's like, ugh, jerk. The space croc from the thumbnail of the stream coming in your shop as a poster or in a Gumroad piece. I would love to print that on my wall. Maybe. Yeah, maybe. I really thought of it. So I think I make it thick where it's not supposed to be thick. Yeah. Okay, so like think of line as like elastic bands sometimes too. So if something's under tension, like an arc of a back, like a big form, um, think about how that stretches, and then how the ends where it's being held for that tension is thicker. You know, there's that elastic quality to it, and that can add a lot of the weight to your line as well. That can look really beautiful. If you want to look at my absolute favorite, who understands line weight like an absolute god, is Alphonse Mucha. And there's two eras to Alphonse Mucha. Most people know him for all the Art Nouveau posters that were done all through the early 1900s. Or I don't really know the years, so let's just pretend I know what I'm talking about with the years, but I don't. But then he maybe he hit the same thing I hit. I don't want to relate myself to him because he's he's just very much on a different level. But he left the commercial art world, all that beautiful Art Nouveau poster stuff that he was doing. He wanted to become a painter. He wanted to focus on that, and he did something called the Slav Epic, and he just did study after study of these beautiful paintings. And he's just such a master at line work that I learned so much just from studying his work. He's just absolutely incredible. So I would implore you in a big way to go and find examples of his work from both of his early years as more of a commercial artist and later on. And then there's other artists like Alphonse Mucha, that's right. Yeah. So on the surface, when you first get into Alphonse Mucha, it's kind of like all of us when we got into art, and there's Salvador Dali and how whimsical a lot of the strange stuff that he was doing was. But then as you sort of start to look more at their work, you start to see more about what they were actually after in their own work, and you start to see them as, I don't know, Alphonse Mucha is one of those things that just looks great on the wall of a cafe, but when you really dig into the work, there's a quality to what he was able to achieve in his line work that I don't know if anybody has been able to pull off. Adam Hughes is pretty close, but he copies Mucha a lot of times, so still Mucha, absolutely the best work. There's if you guys want to look up a piece, I was in San Diego as a college student, and they had a retrospective show on his work, and I went down, and there was one piece. It was a print of the piece, and it was a wine label. So it was like this really long, thin label. I have a mug with it on it, and it was called Vandes Incas. So VINDESINCAS. And it was a wine label, and it was like an Incan princess being served by like an elder Incan man, and there's this quality to their hands as they meet. She has these really young, beautiful, elegant hands, and he has these absolutely gorgeous, old, weathered, wrinkled, just gnarled hands. But they're both so elegant in their own way, and it's just the opposition and the contrast between them. I've had a lot of moments where I looked at something and everything changed, and that was one of those moments where I just saw it, and all of a sudden I just had a goal. There was something about that piece that just did everything for me. So much mastery in it, and it was for a wine label of all things. Very strange. Very beautiful. So like right here, like as I'm kind of inventing how these fins are going, I'm just laying in these light lines, and then I go back and kind of concentrate on the line weight. So there's sometimes line weight isn't just like your first go, it's like a building process. And I was always really intimidated to admit that sometimes my line weight was built up over time and not just like this like beautiful first try line like some of the masters can do. But then I realized, or I learned, that even they often, that's just for show. That's not something that is actually occurring. It's always the sort of building process. Graffiti artists who have gorgeous line, a lot of times those thick thins, those are built up and established slowly. Andre Frapin? Why do I not know that name? Is that line work stuff? Because if it is, I'm going to go look it up as soon as I get off the stream. My wife recently, or not recently, but pretty recently, discovered like the Russian socialist painters. And holy crow, could those mothers paint. And it was just completely absent from all the European training that we usually receive because of its the region that it was established in. Absolutely gorgeous painting. But those guys and girls could draw as well. All right, there's our fish poster. That was fun. To do like the little specimen call-outs or something like that. It's a pretty decent range. Oh, he's a comic artist. Alright, let me write it down. But you like the line work? So contemporaries that I really look at, and you guys are probably going to know all these names, but whatever. Claire Wendling has been an inspiration. She is incredible. You want to see line weight. You want to see someone who can just handle just a simple number 2 pencil. Just like, when people say, what brush is that, what paper are you using, blah, 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 when you want to see someone who just uses copier paper and just basic tools and can suck life out of them and out of the tools and embed it into the drawing. I mean, she's absolutely incredible. She changed my world. Let's see, what am I looking at here? Andre Frapin. So definitely look up her work if you haven't seen it before. Francisco Herrera, amazing. Who else is a contemporary that I'm looking at all the time? Oh, I'm blanking right now because it's too late for me to actually think, but there's just so many people out there who have just gorgeous line. I'll put the little antenna on this little crustacean here. I don't like when people study other people's style per se, because I feel like that's, if someone learns how to ape a style really well, that means that we're all losing out on what that person's style would have been had they focused on what their own work would have looked like. But when it comes to line weight, I really do. Thanks, Bob. I'm gonna save. I really do feel like studying other people's line weight is important, and it goes a long ways to like training you. It's kind of one of those things where it's like, if someone can do it in front of you, then all of a sudden it shows that it's possible. But I do want to say, like, if you're training off of someone else's work, make sure you're still training your own work, and you're just, you're taking things from it, but it stays your work. And I'm not just saying that as like you shouldn't steal from people or whatever the argument could be. I really mean it like each artist really does have a really unique perspective, something that they bring to the table that no one else can bring. All of our life experiences, everything, like, they're unique to us. And when you kind of become an artist and you start sharing those stories, those wouldn't exist otherwise. And so when you're studying someone else's style and you end up aping it a little bit too much, you're really just expounding on what their stories are and the things that they've learned, and you're kind of like robbing the world of your unique story set. And I really am passionate about finding all these really unique stories, and it does take a lot of mental energy to realize that, like, you are not going to be the biggest fan of your work, not the same kind of fan that I'm going to be of your work, because I've just not been able to see the stories told from that perspective before, because I'm not you. As soon as you embrace that, well, I'll be happy. And that's important, right? All right. That's going to be it for drawing tonight. Sorry again about the rendering stuff. I'm going to stick around for Jean-Michel Gales. Like all these awesome French names. I have a pretty big collection of French graphic novels. Alessandro Barbucci does Sky Doll. Absolutely gorgeous line. I mean, absolutely stunning drawings, but the Sky Doll stuff in particular, and I think he does something called Monster Allergy. Absolutely gorgeous stuff. Highly recommend looking that stuff up. Alright, it's 2:12. I'm going to stick around for 3-4 minutes. You guys have any questions, anything you want to talk about? Otherwise, I'm going to go find a soft place to lay my head. Chill out. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. I really do. I'm not gonna promise anything, because technology is always a little bit uncertain, but I will do as many tests as I can to make sure that Photoshop crash doesn't happen again. And if I can somehow get the file back, maybe we can just pick up where we left off, because we never really got into the rendering and the surfacing of it, so I'll do my best to kind of salvage it. Okay, I'm so glad this stream is being recorded, because I'm gonna, not the stream, the chat, because I'm gonna look up all these names. Now I know exactly what I'm gonna be doing while I work tomorrow. Awesome. You guys are awesome for coming out. I mean, I'm glad that you guys are getting something out of the stuff that I'm saying, but like your questions, there's this funny thing about art, which is like someone asks you a question about what you think you know, and it's not until you actually have to say what it is, like how you do it or what you think it is. Sometimes you're just like, I have no idea what I'm talking about. And other times you're just like, that's the first time I've ever thought of what I've been doing for the last 15 years of my life. And so you guys are awesome for asking these questions and trying to put me on the spot a little bit. I think it's been really fun and really educational for hopefully you guys, but definitely for me. So awesome. Okay. Amanda, Jessica, username, Casper, Steven, Josh, Sleeping Dumplings. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys all next Monday. It's definitely getting late for me. Alright, I'll talk to you guys soon. Sweet Philippe. Thanks, Brian. Alright, see you guys Monday.